Hi everyone, welcome back to English literature class. In today's class, we're going to do a brief analysis and summary of the prologue. Our lesson objectives: discuss the purpose of the prologue in the play, state the functions of dramatic techniques, identify examples of dramatic techniques in the prologue, identify possible themes that may appear in the play based on the prologue, and summarize the prologue. What is the purpose of the prologue in a play? A good prologue performs one of many functions in a story, or a play in our case: foreshadowing events to come, or providing background information or the backstory. We can see this happening in Tijan and his brothers because in the prologue of this play, Frog and the rest of the insects are the ones telling us the story. They give us an insight before the action of the play begins. What are the functions of dramatic techniques? Well, dramatic techniques are used by a playwright to enhance the emotional or the oral or the visual experience of the audience to underline a script's meaning. That is, for each technique or dramatic technique that is used, it is supposed to enhance the experience of the reader or the audience. Now, we have a few dramatic techniques that are used in the play Tijan and his brothers, but we are merely focusing on the prologue in today's lesson. One of the new dramatic techniques that you're learning this week is spectacle. Spectacle refers to visual elements of the play, sets, costume, or special effects. Anything that brings about some sort of excitement or noise, that would be examples of spectacle in the play. Some other dramatic techniques used in this play and or prologue, or in any play for that matter, once it is that you're reading, you should look out for some of these. This list is not exhaustive, so that means there can be more. We have satire, foreshadowing, symbolism, spectacle, and humor. In our prologue, we see evidence of spectacle and we also see evidence of humor. Let's look at some examples of spectacle in this play. Now, in the prologue, now I want you to follow with me in your script. We're looking at the prologue. Now, one of the first examples of spectacle that we can identify in the prologue is the rolls of the drums. When you hear that sound or the music that is played, or the crash of the cymbals, the shrieks, the thunder, the sad flute, anything musical, the drumming, any lights flashing. And remember that the spectacle gives you an insight as to maybe a new character is coming on stage or a character is leaving the stage. Now, we just did the examples of the spectacle in the play or in the prologue. However, you can now read through the prologue to find these examples. So again, we have the weird music, the crash of the cymbals, the drumming, all of this, the shrieking, the thunder, all of this are examples, or all of these are examples of spectacle in the prologue. A few more examples of dramatic techniques used in the prologue can be humor or foreshadowing. Now, we see evidence of foreshadowing in the play when the mother, in the prologue, when the mother says, "Who can understand it? Death. Death is coming nearer." That was when she realized that the Bolam was coming, or that the devil was coming, or her superstitious beliefs led her to hear what was happening outside in the rain, and she said, "Death is nearer." She was foreshadowing the death of her sons or just death in general. An example that we can find of humor in the play, or in the prologue rather, is when Grajean and Mijan enter the prologue and they start explaining who they are. Now, when Mijan says, and I will read his line, When Grosjean says, one time it have nothing to eat, but one dry bread to break. I went out to chop some wood to make a nice fire, but the wood was too damp, so I didn't use the axe, as I didn't want it to get wet. If it get wet, it get rusty. Right there, we have an example of humor as a dramatic technique, because it is virtually impossible to get the axe rusty because the wood is wet, so you can't cut the wood. So in Grosjean's stupidity, as Frog put it, this will be funny to the audience because the axe is meant to chop wood whether it is wet or dry. The same example of humor can also be used when we look at Mijan, when he's saying that his brother has no sense when he says sense, and that's following exactly after that. He says, I went out to do fishing for crayfish by the cold stones in the cold spring in the ferns, but when I get there, so I find I lack bait. How do you, as a fisherman, go out without bait? What is the purpose of that? I do hope you're following me, and I hope you're following in your text. Um, it is very important at this point to note that if you are not following the text, if you're not reading the text, then you're not going to be able to fully understand what is happening in the play. As you read through the prologue once more, you should find if you can spot any examples of dramatic techniques and note them. Writing your notes, whether in your text or in your books, is very important. Let's look at some themes that we can identify in the prologue. Now, again, these are just two dominant themes that I'm going to be identifying today. However, I am not saying that there are not more themes in the prologue. It is just that this is your time to go ahead and find them based on how they are presented. So we can identify poverty and we can identify superstition. Now remember that themes are the subjects of a particular piece of literary work. Remember that themes give them the play or the story or the poem meaning. These are what the authors or the playwrights or the poets want you to learn or to see what that's happening in the play or whatever piece of literary work that you are doing. Poverty is seen in the prologue and it's going to translate throughout the entire play. When we realize that the family, because they were poor and they were hungry, the devil came and gave them this challenge with the promise of wanting to give them riches. Superstition, when the mother said she heard something outside and she wanted to see what it was, and Grosjean and Mijan were saying they see nothing outside, they hear nothing outside, and Tijan went to look, and this is when she said, death is near. No, there could be more themes, but you can find them based on your reading. Finally, in today's lesson, we're going to take a brief look at the prologue. We're going to summarize it briefly. We're going to do a little analysis of the prologue, and we're going to look at the information that is given. Now, we know that Frog is the storyteller, and what it is that we realized the playwright wanted to do was to bring that aspect of Caribbean folklore, of African folklore, into this space. What we can tell or what we do know is that we have kept some traditions alive. We know that the oral tradition is very much alive in the Caribbean, in the African diaspora, where we tell stories. So Frog being the storyteller here is very important for the playwright. Now, the animals in the prologue can be seen as examples of African folklore. For example, when you hear of the Anansi stories, how our ancestors or grandparents or great grandparents used to tell these stories around maybe campfires or under the light of the moon, and they would just tell these stories. It's the same feeling, the same atmosphere, the same mood that Walcott would like us to get while reading this play. The playwright chooses to use this storytelling method in order to highlight that part of our African ancestry. Now we look at the chorus of the animals, the frog, the bird, the firefly, and the cricket. and they are a chorus, this group. Now, notice that the first few lines of the prologue is an allusion to Greek drama. When the frog says Greek croak, Greek croak, the playwright would like to give praise, if you would like to use that term, to the Greek playwrights like Aristotle and also Aeschylus. The voices, and when frog says Aeschylus me, Walcott is alluding to the Greek tragedian who wrote tragedies, and we remember that this play is a tragedy. We also know that the chorus would be the voices who tell you what is happening throughout the play. Now, if we move further, we can see Caribbean folklore coming into the play. For example, Papa Boa, and he is the protector of the animals. Now, I want you to go and do some research for me and find out about St. Lucian culture and Trinidadian culture and look at their folklores. I'm sure you'll come across some of these, especially Papa Boa. Now, the play is to be read from a post-colonial standpoint, meaning after colonization, with references being made to the white planter or master, etc. Now, one of the major aspects or functions of the prologue is to give the readers the opportunity to see what the conflict is before the act begins. So for us, the conflict would be the challenge where the Bolam brings the message from his master, the devil, that each son should come in order of age to see if they can make the devil angry or feel human emotions. And then they would be rewarded. Again, that theme of poverty is coming out, and the fact that persons will use your poverty against you. Now, this can be an allusion to slavery, going back to that post-colonial reading of the play. It can be an allusion to slavery and what was promised in some instances by the colonizers. So we have to be very careful in how we read this play through the lens of the playwright and what he wants us to see. Revealed in the prologue also would be that the older brothers, Grosjean and Mijan, have a dislike for Tijan, especially when they complained about doing all the work and all the thinking. And when Tijan said, Mama, I didn't do a thing, the older brother started to jeer him, Mama, I didn't do a thing, Mama, I didn't do a thing. And I want to also point out here that there's a bit of French being used, or someone can correct me if I'm wrong, a bit of French Creole being used here, the St. Lucian dialect. And you can do some research on that as well and get back to me. Because it's very important that we honor the language that is used in this play. We honor the roots of this play, the heritage, the ancestry that Derek Walcott wants us in the Caribbean as students of literature to understand and honor in this play. Now, we also realize that the older brothers, Grosjean and Mijan, do not believe in God as their mother, due to their blasphemous rants about God forgetting them and their poverty, and that God is too irresponsible. We realize that we can draw a theme from this as well, religion. We realize that the boys, Grosjean and Mijan, are not so into this quote unquote God thing when the mother says we need to pray, because for them, God has abandoned them because they are in poverty and they do not need any help from him. Now, I want you to continue to read this play. I want you to look at the prologue a little bit deeper. This is just a brief analysis of it, but the analysis can't work if you don't read and formulate your own questions and start questioning the material to see how authentic it is, even in our space today. Thank you so much for joining us in class today, and we'll see you next time.